Very true.
There's no doubt that the incredible efforts of thousands of folks across NASA over the last 2 decades have set the stage for what is possible in low Earth orbit. The Ax-2 mission is a critical step toward opening those possibilities to a host of new participants, governments, diverse researchers, manufacturers, and more. Here on Earth, we're already seeing benefits from research currently conducted on the ISS, from water and air purification systems to testing medical devices and therapeutics. Pretty amazing stuff.
In addition to tech demos and medical research, access to low Earth orbit allows for a connection to the arts and other outreach opportunities. Ax-2 is the first of several proposed missions in advance of Axiom Station, the world's first commercial space station. A sustainable commercial low Earth orbit economy means expanded access to work in space. It also frees up NASA and its partners to put their budget towards other exploration programs while granting space agencies around the world more opportunities through commercial efforts.
And over its lifetime, the ISS has accomplished an unprecedented feat, continuously sustained operations on and off the Earth for more than 22 years. This is not only a true testament to the technology required to physically achieve that, but also to the collaborative and cooperative efforts of thousands of people across the world to ensure that multiple nations, agencies, and entities, both public and private, work together to push humanity forward. And as we move forward, private industries need time to learn how to establish and maintain these relationships effectively. So, by flying private astronaut missions like Ax-2 to the ISS, Axiom is taking essential steps to get that on-the-job training as we work towards building the world's first commercial space station. Axiom Station is an opportunity to continue the story of the ISS, science, and research through cooperation and collaboration for the benefit of all. Ax-2 is this next chapter.
So once again, we are observing Dragon Freedom as it approaches the International Space Station. The crew has their suits on, they're in their seats, and they are inside those blinking lights.
That's so amazing to think about.
And we will see those blinking lights get closer and closer over the next couple of hours. Everything when you are approaching or departing the International Space Station is highly choreographed, and it's really slow, and that's for safety purposes. It's the safer way and the best way to do it. So we will see Dragon get closer and closer. Even those 2 lights that we see, the red one and the green one, they represent the port and starboard side, and I never remember what color goes to what, but I can tell you that we will start to see those get closer as we have been, even over the last few minutes.
You might be seeing some stars on your screen, but most of those dots are dead pixels in that camera sensor, and that happens because of that high radiation in space.
Now, Dragon is capable of carrying up to 7 passengers to and from Earth orbit and beyond. It is the only spacecraft currently flying that is capable of returning significant amounts of cargo to Earth, and is the first private spacecraft to take humans to the space station. Dragon is fully autonomous, which means that it flies itself, but it also features full manual override capabilities in case of emergency. Standing at almost 27 feet tall from bottom of the trunk to the top of the nose cone, Crew Dragon is composed of 2 main elements: the capsule, which is designed to hold crew and pressurized cargo, as well as an unpressurized section, which is known as the trunk. The nose cone at the top of the capsule protects the docking system and also the guidance navigation control system, which is the system that's being primarily utilized right now as Dragon is approaching the International Space Station. That nose cone opens for docking and remains attached to the attached to the Crew Dragon spacecraft, unlike previous versions of Dragon, and that helps toward our efforts toward reusability. Now, opposite of the nose cone is the trunk. It provides attachment points for Falcon 9, the Dragon capsule, and cargo. One half of the trunk is covered in solar panels. That's the black side of the trunk on the exterior. And those provide power to Dragon during flight and while on station. The other half contains a radiator, and it rejects heat from the active thermal control system to space using SpaceX's new Pika tiling technology. The trunk also now has new aerodynamic fins, which provide stability in the event of an emergency abort. Now, in the event of an emergency abort, Crew Dragon is outfitted with 8 Super Draco thrusters, as opposed to just the regular Draco thrusters, and those power the astronauts to safety. Dragon's Super Draco launch escape system is a key safety feature of Crew Dragon, and it gives the crew the ability to quickly separate from Falcon 9 and safely escape from the time of launch all the way to orbit. It's a feature that no other spacecraft in history has possessed. So it's pretty awesome, and it's a great safety feature.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kate. We are actually going to toss back now to Leah at Mission Control at Johnson Space Center. Leah?
Thank you both very much. And yes, tally-ho, we have sights set on Dragon. Now, as you can see, it is pretty dark outside. That's because the International Space Station is in an orbital nighttime. It's currently flying over the South Pacific Ocean, about 261 miles above Earth. And of course, Dragon is now just slightly below it. Waypoint 0 brought Dragon the approach initiation burn brought Dragon to waypoint 0 at 400 meters below the International Space Station. The systems have checked out, and it's now moving up toward waypoint 1. That is when Dragon is approximately 220 meters above the space station. It'll be on the docking axis, meaning it's directly in front of the docking port. So the crew are headed to the zenith port, the space-facing port of Node 2. And the other Dragon that's currently on board, which brought the Crew 6 crew earlier this year, that is docked to the forward port of the Harmony module. As you can see, we go in and out of receiving feeds from the International Space Station. That happens when we go through satellite handover periods. The International Space Station is orbiting Earth and seeing a sunrise and a sunset every 45 minutes. So we constantly hand over to different satellites that receive the feeds from the station and send it back to us on the ground. So you'll see that a little bit this morning. After we reach waypoint 1, we will pause until Dragon gets the go to move into waypoint 2. That's when they're only 20 meters away from the International Space Station, and the spacecraft is focused on aligning its docking system with the International Docking Adapter. Slow and steady wins the race at this point in the mission. Right now we're moving at less than 5 miles per hour. And as we move in from waypoint 2, we'll be moving even slower. We may hear the call-out chop at a little less than 30 seconds before docking. That's the crew hands-off point, when any aborts need to be done automatically by Dragon. And of course, we are tracking docking to come in at about 8:10 a.m. Central Time this morning. The crew are in their suits. They have completed good suit leak checks, everything continuing to move along very smoothly today. A look back at some of what was completed last night. Shortly after launch, less than an hour after liftoff, at about 5:23 p.m. Central Time, Dragon executed the phase burn. That was the first of the 5 major burns required to raise Dragon's orbit and position it for approach to the space station. About 7 hours later, we had the boost burn. That puts the crew in an orbit where Dragon's apogee, or the highest point, is about 10 kilometers lower than the station. After that, we executed the close co-elliptic burn at 12:51 a.m. Central Time. The close burn puts Dragon on an orbit roughly co-elliptic with the space station. That means it is roughly 10 kilometers lower than the station the entire way around the Earth, instead of just being 10 kilometers below the station at apogee, or its highest point. We also saw the transfer burn at about 2:47 a.m. Central Time this morning. That's the fourth major maneuver where we raised Dragon's apogee again, or the highest point of its orbit, to just 2.5 kilometers lower than the space station. We
Dragon,
rounded everything
SpaceX
out
on
with
the big loop. Mid-course burn complete and nominal. Trajectory has converged on waypoint 0.
Dragon copies.
And we just heard confirmation of a good mid-course maneuver. That's about halfway through the journey to waypoint 0 to make sure Dragon is positioned right under the station, again about 400 meters below. So confirmation that they did indeed conduct a mid-course maneuver this morning, and everything continues to look good for Dragon. We are in integrated operations. This happens when Dragon gets closer to the space station, specifically when they enter the approach ellipsoid, that 4 by 2 by 2 kilometer invisible boundary around the International Space Station. This helps us govern all arriving and departing visiting vehicles, whether they carry cargo or crew. We're also hearing good words about teams being go to move inside the keep out sphere. That's another checkpoint that consists of an imaginary sphere around the station with a radius of 200 meters. The keep out sphere carries a similar requirement on the orbital trajectory that if Dragon were to somehow lose control of its thrusters, the space station would be safe for 4 orbits or about 6 hours. However, everything looking good on Dragon this morning. Again, we're in an orbital nighttime. This view coming from the International Space Station as we are tracking Dragon and its approach to the orbiting laboratory. Once Dragon arrives at the space station today, they will be greeted by 7 crew members currently living on orbit. That includes NASA's Frank Rubio, Steve Bowen, and Woody Hoberg, Sultan Al-Nayati of the United Arab Emirates, and Roscosmos cosmonauts Sergei Prokopyev, Dmitry Petelin, and Andrei Fedyaev. That'll bring our crew up to 11 for the next several days. We are looking at about an 8-day docked mission for the Ax-2 crew, about 10 days in orbit in total. The crew on the International Space Station will be monitoring arrival this morning, specifically Woody Hoberg of NASA and Sultan Al-Nayati of the United Arab Emirates will be in the station's cupola using special software to track Dragon's approach and make sure it stays in the expected zones. Once Dragon is docked, Hoberg will be our prime to start those hatch opening operations. He will start by opening the large hatch on the Node 2 forward, or Node 2 zenith that is, giving him access into the pressurized mating adapter. They'll then pressurize the vestibule, and that's the small space between the hatches on the Dragon and space station. Of course, the vestibule is exposed to vacuum prior to docking,
Houston,
so the crew...
on the big loop, Dragon range is approximately 1,000 meters. Monitor long-range approach per steps 1 to 4 in 1.102, Dragon approach and retreat monitoring. ISS crew is now primed for vehicle approach monitoring.
That call up to the International Space Station, just as we were explaining. They are primed to monitor the arrival of the Ax-2 crew today. Again, we're heading toward waypoint 0. That's the 400 meters below station mark. We are now 950 meters from station, closing in at about 2.9 miles per hour.
Hello, Zen Station copies.
So once we dock at approximately 8:10 a.m. Central Time, it takes about 2 hours to pressurize the vestibule, the space between the hatches. Flight controllers here in Houston will monitor and verify the pressure readings to make sure that everything is
Dragon
leak-free
SpaceX
before we
on
get
the big
ready.
loop for approach setup.
Go ahead on the big loop for approach setup.
Ground has pulled go for approach 0 and will be enabling the maneuver shortly. Expected maneuver start time is per your forward displays. Reminder that Dragon will continue through waypoint 1 to waypoint 2 without stopping at waypoint 1.
We copy. Go expected shortly, passing through 0 to 1.
Good to be back.
Good news from the ground to the crew, that coming from the core, the crew operations responsible engineer in Hawthorne, California at SpaceX headquarters, to Commander Peggy Whitson aboard Dragon. The team will not have to pause at waypoint 1. Sometimes there's a pause associated there so they can check out all systems, but things are looking good this morning to continue through. Dragon now 800 meters away from the space station. The International Space Station crew members have been preparing for arrival of Dragon by moving and setting up some laptops as well as crew alternate sleep accommodations. Again, we will have 11 crew members. Feels like a full house aboard the station once the Ax-2 crew arrives today. Teams also will do things like feather the solar arrays or maneuver them so that they avoid any plumes from Dragon once it gets closer to the station. It's also been a busy time on the space station with another variety of activities, including a port relocation. Just a couple of weeks ago, the Crew 6 crew boarded their Dragon spacecraft and moved it from Zenith, the space-facing port on Node 2, to the forward-facing port. So that is where the Ax-2 crew will dock today, to that Zenith port. However, the maneuver was to prepare for the arrival of CRS-28, the 28th commercial resupply mission from SpaceX to the International Space Station. That will bring with it some new solar arrays. Those are called International Space Station rollout solar arrays, and those are stored in the trunk of Dragon. That Zenith port, it makes it much easier for the Canadarm2 to help retrieve those IROSAs for eventual installation on some spacewalks later this year. We've had a handful of spacewalks happen over just the last few weeks at the space station, including 3 Roscosmos spacewalks to move and connect and deploy a radiator, as well as
Houston
one
Station
NASA
on
spacewalk to...
Just reporting per block 1, vehicle in sight.
Houston copies.
We have recently had a spacewalk to prepare for those upcoming solar array installations. And hearing confirmation from the crew aboard the International Space Station that they themselves also have their sights set on the approaching Dragon. Ahead of arrival of the crew today, the space station crew are moving through their morning, including preparing the Node 2 area for docking and hatch opening, as well as getting the required exercise for the day. And here we have a new view of Dragon approaching the space station from the International Space Station itself. Again, we are looking at docking exactly an hour from now at 8:10 a.m. Central Time. This view from the International Space Station while Dragon is still 630 meters away. Again, this is an entirely autonomous flight for Dragon. The crew aboard has been trained that they can take over if needed. However, things continue to move smoothly this morning. The crew off-duty time ended at 5:30 a.m. Central Time. The crew got suited up shortly after, and the big loop was configured, meaning that team members here in Houston can speak with teams in Hawthorne as well as on the space station and on Dragon on one big communication loop rather than on various different loops. Being that it is an autonomous flight, NASA astronaut Woody Hoberg and Sultan Al Nayati of the United Arab Emirates will be in the cupola just to monitor the arrival of Dragon. They can also send commands to the capsule if needed, but that's not anticipated. Hoberg will then be primed for assisting in pressurization of the vestibule and the hatch opening operations. After docking and the welcome ceremony, all crew members will then move into an ISS safety briefing, making sure that they are briefed on everything they need to know while living aboard the International Space Station for safety purposes. Of course, they go through a lot of that training here on the ground, but it's a great refresher once they arrive on board in the microgravity environment. You might have seen a little bit of lighting change. We are now entering into an orbital daytime. Again, we see 16 sunrises and sunsets a day aboard the International Space Station, moving at 17,500 miles per hour, giving us an even better view of Dragon as it gets closer, now about 500 meters from the orbiting lab. The space station and Dragon are now flying about 270 statute miles just west of Chile. Again, we're heading toward waypoint 0. That'll be at 400 meters below the space station. We are now at 480 meters below the space station. The crew will not stop at waypoint 0. They will continue to move through. Once they make their way to waypoint 1, There will be a continued go, no go to allow Dragon to begin its approach to waypoint 2. That's located inside the keep out sphere about 20 meters away from the space station. We do not have to hold at waypoint 1. All of the systems have checked out, and so we have that opportunity to continue moving toward waypoint 2. However, we do conduct a hold at waypoint 2 just to make sure Dragon is completely aligned with the international docking adapter on the Node 2 Zenith or space-facing port. So at that 20-meter distance, Dragon will slow itself down even further, bringing its approach in and eventually make initial soft contact with the adapter soft capture ring. That'll retract and bring Dragon in for the hard capture sequence. Now less than 450 meters away from the International Space Station. Again, we are in integrated operations with teams here in Mission Control Houston monitoring Dragon's approach to the International Space Station, along with teams in Hawthorne, California. The crew are in their suits. They had good suit leak checks earlier today. They also are seated. We have them get in their suits and their seats during dynamic phases of flight. Even though it looks like Crew Dragon is moving slowly, we want to make sure that they are in their suits as a precautionary measure during the docking process. They had an opportunity to get out of those suits, have some free time. As Kate and Duke mentioned earlier, they were able to call down to the ground last night and discuss what it was like to be in microgravity. They also had a chance to get some rest, maybe eat some meals, and then eventually their crew rest time ended at 5:30 a.m. Central this morning. Again, you're watching live coverage of the Ax-2 mission, Axiom's second private astronaut mission to the International Space Station. These are not NASA astronauts arriving aboard Dragon today. One of them, however, is a former NASA astronaut, Peggy Whitson. This is her third spacecraft to fly on. She joins a small elite group of astronauts who have flown on 3 separate spacecraft. She has flown on the Space Shuttle, on the Roscosmos Soyuz, and now on Dragon. Since NASA opened up the space station for commercial activity in 2019, we've continued to work with private industry to prepare for the future of low Earth orbit. And our long-term goal is to be not just the provider of a low Earth orbit destination, but to be a customer. We want to be one of many customers purchasing commercially owned and operated services. So we need to work together today to ensure this path of tomorrow. Enabling these private astronaut missions helps us to refine and mature any of the processes we need for that future. So our NASA astronauts are working side by side with
Dragon
private and
SpaceX
national
on the Big Loop.
astronauts.
Approach 0 has started and trajectory has converged on waypoint 1. Expected arrival at waypoint 1 is per your forward displays.
Dragon copies.
Again, we have reached waypoint 0, that 400 meters directly below the International Space Station. Coming up, we are going to move from waypoint 0 to waypoint 1, pausing at that distance of approximately 220 meters, putting Dragon on the docking axis, meaning it's directly in front of the docking port. As mentioned previously, all of the visiting spacecraft take the phased approach to the International Space Station. They stop at predetermined gates for the teams to run quick checks on the vehicle performance before approaching the orbiting lab. When it comes to bringing two spacecraft together, slow and steady wins the race, as docking operations require a great deal of precision to make sure we're keeping the spacecraft and the crew safe. So when we say wins the race, we're now traveling at less than half a mile per hour. Again, we are in integrated operations during this time, meaning teams from both Hawthorne on the left of your screen and Mission Control Houston on the right are monitoring Dragon and the International Space Station. Additionally, the Axiom Mission Control here in Houston, Texas as well is continuing to monitor the flight. They'll remain on console this week.
With you on the Big Loop.
Prior range is 400 and stable attitude as expected.
Houston copies.
The Axiom team will work with the Ax-2 crew aboard the space station this week to ensure all of the payload operations that they'll be conducting, as well as any of their downlinks with team members on the ground, as well as media and potentially some STEM outlets will be executed smoothly. Again, we are in a satellite handover of the tracking data and relay satellite system. These are tracked throughout the flight. We see this with the International Space Station as well as on Dragon. Multiple different customers around the world use these satellite systems. All 7 crew members currently aboard the International Space Station, currently moving about their day, some of them exercising, some enjoying their midday meal. Others are working on various payloads and scientific research aboard the International Space Station. There are some constraints as we move into integrated operations, specifically during docking, and once the spacecraft is soft docked, there will be an exercise constraint. We don't want any additional loads imparted on Dragon, so any vibrations that can be caused from using, say, the treadmill or the stationary bicycle, we want to keep that from, again, imparting those additional loads to ensure a safe and smooth docking for Dragon. So the crew will be asked and are not timelined to perform any workout activities during that time. This view from the International Space Station, currently flying 266 statute miles above the South Atlantic Ocean. Dragon is about 400 meters away from the space station. Again, we reached waypoint 0 and have the go to move to waypoint 1, which will put us 220 meters from the space station above the docking or on the docking axis above the Node 2 zenith port. After we reach waypoint 1, we'll move into the keep out sphere. That's the 200-meter sphere with a radius of 200 meters around the International Space Station. Again, this is an invisible boundary, but helps us monitor all vehicles that arrive and depart the orbiting laboratory. For any maneuvers at this point, we are seeing Dragon use its service section Draco thrusters. These each provide 90 pounds of force. There are 12 of those Dracos. Those are only used in the vacuum of space. It's good for these attitude control maneuvers, and those are grouped into 4 clusters of 3 thrusters each. On board, Dragon also has Super Dracos. These are only used for pad or ascent abort scenarios, so these are currently disabled. They are disabled after the ascent portion of the mission. There are also 4 forward bulkhead Draco thrusters. These are located underneath the nose cone. They're used for larger burns like the deorbit burn. However, we're not looking ahead at that currently. We expect that to come about 8 days from now. We are planning for this crew to spend 8 days aboard the International Space Station. Also located underneath the nose cone is the docking hatch. This is the portion that will dock to the International Space Station and the hatch that crew members will use to float in and out of Dragon. This is in contrast to the side hatch that the crew used to board the spacecraft yesterday, that they will also use to depart the spacecraft after splashdown and being pulled aboard the SpaceX recovery ship. Pretty quiet here in Mission Control Houston, as well as obviously aboard Dragon and the International Space Station, as this is a fully autonomous flight, and everything continues to go well for Dragon and its arrival this morning. Again, Dragon has reached waypoint 0 and is making its way to waypoint 1, 220 meters above the International Space Station and its intended destination this morning, which is the space-facing hatch on Node 2. So with that, I'm going to send it back over to Hawthorne for a status update. Kate and Duke?
Thanks, Leah. Continuing to follow Dragon's progress as it gets closer and closer to the International Space Station. We're now just 0.45 kilometers away from the ISS. And as Leah mentioned, slow and steady wins the race. Now, there are teams supporting this mission from multiple locations. This is Johnson Space Center, located in Houston, Texas. This mission control room is staffed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Team members are trained in a variety of disciplines and monitor all station systems. In addition to this control room, we have the mission control room here at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. That's the view there on the left-hand side of your screen. That is where our teams are monitoring Dragon and checking in on all of its systems. And then, of course, the Axiom control room on the right-hand side.
Yeah, right there for Axiom Space. Our team is there at Mission Control in Houston as well. It's pretty fantastic. From this secure facility, we have live access to all the voice, video, and data from the ISS and can work alongside their NASA counterparts to run on-orbit operations and monitor every aspect of the mission in real time. It's led by what we call our Axel, or our Axiom Operations Lead. And there are various positions around the room for research, communications, medical, integration, stowage, timeline operations, etc. It's a pretty significant step in our journey as a company to expand access to low Earth orbit, as it's only the 12th ground segment partner for the ISS program. So through this facility, we are enabling our customers in the global community a front row seat to the work being done on station.
So as you can see, lots of people supporting this mission from all different locations. It really is a team effort to execute these integrated operations successfully. And part of the reason is, as you can see, it's not just the 4 crew members that are inside Dragon Freedom right now approaching the space station. It's the whole integrated International Space Station team as a whole. Once the Ax-2 crew arrives on station, there will actually be 11 crew members total, and it's going to be pretty exciting. Like Leah said, a full house, but the Ax-2 crew is going to be super busy. They have a lot of science and research planned, and they will also be contributing to the station as well as the other crewmates that are up there with them.
Absolutely. This crew has a very full schedule while on station, and actually a lot of that time will be focused on some pretty fascinating efforts. For the sake of this conversation that we'll have right now, the science that they're doing is organized into a few categories like life sciences, physical sciences, tech demonstrations, etc. So with physical science, this includes some radiation protection research as well as some storm-related research, helping to create rain, cloud seeding, really fascinating stuff like that, and as well as enhance our understanding of dangerous thunderstorms. There's actually a phenomenon called transient luminous effects, which are upper atmospheric lightning or ionospheric lightning.
And it's awesome that research could potentially help operations at Kennedy Space Center. As we saw yesterday, there was an anvil cloud rolling in, and it's really interesting how this research that the Ax-2 crew will do could potentially feed back into space operations on the ground.
Absolutely. A very full circle moment right there. So by the time we're launching Ax-3, we will have those data back and we'll be ahead of the game. So on the tech side of research being conducted, this crew will also demonstrate ways to automate some of the tasks that take up precious crew time, things like transferring data or tracking where supplies and materials are on board the space station. There's also an effort to make communicating with Earth easier. So at the heart of Axiom Space is the mantra to build history, to expand access to low Earth orbit for all. And so we're dedicated to creating partnerships with companies that you wouldn't typically expect to hear about going to space, to grow the volume of those who can conduct meaningful research and research on board and outreach as well about science and everything else included in that. So a lot going on up there, and they're certainly going to have their hands full once they dock, which we should be seeing shortly here.
Yeah, we're very much looking forward to it. Look at this. This is our first view inside the Dragon capsule. I love this view. So on the left-hand side would be our commander, Peggy Whitson, and on the right-hand side of that view was pilot John Schaffner. Now, this view is also very cool because this is looking at the International Space Station from the Dragon.
What a great shot.
Yeah, it's just incredible that we can get these live views and see what Dragon is seeing as it is approaching the ISS.
I love living in the future.
Like we've mentioned before, we are heading to the Node 2 Zenith port this morning. We have passed through waypoint 0, which is the 400-meter mark, which is 400 meters away from station. We're heading up and around over the station to waypoint 1, which is about...
Dragon station on the big loop. Expect reconfiguration of the C2V2 return link shortly.
Dragon copies.
Station copies.
So that was SpaceX core David Huang just letting the crew know of this upcoming event, referring to C2V2, which is the common communication for visiting vehicle. And that's basically just the link for the visiting vehicle, in this case, Dragon Freedom. But yeah, this view is over the shoulders of our commander and pilot. And I love that you can see what they're seeing. In the center, we can see that they are following along with the upcoming events. The views on the far left and far right panel will illustrate which thrusters are firing when. So I don't really see any, we can see a little bit of light flashing. So if you look at the far left panel and the upper right-hand corner, we saw some illumination there indicating that the Draco thrusters were firing. And one thing that I love about our views as we get closer to the International Space Station, the views that we will get from the ISS looking at Dragon, we should actually be able to see those Draco thrusters firing as Dragon is autonomously steering itself toward that Zenith port. Now, when we say autonomous, it's truly what that means. Dragon is doing all the calculations and steering and flying automatically. It is flying itself. That being said, our pilot, John Schaffner, has the capability to take over manual control at any time if necessary. But it is incredible to be able to see what they're seeing. Oh, and that view on the left-hand side there, we can actually see those thrusters, as I mentioned. It almost looks as if Dragon is like spitting out a little bit, and it's just really cool to be able to see that propulsion system in action as Dragon is flying itself to that Zenith port. And I love it with those two views that we just had because it's Dragon looking at station as well as station looking at Dragon, which always kind of reminds me of the Spider-Man meme of them pointing at each other.
It's a very meta moment. In that image on the right, you see our Commander Peggy Whitson on the left, pilot John Schaffner on the right, and out of frame our mission specialists Rihanna Barnawi and Ali Al-Karni. Likely also monitoring all these events. Everyone on board this Dragon is probably very, very anxiously awaiting this moment of docking. Ending nearly a 16-hour transit to get to the ISS after launching.
Now we are roughly 20 minutes away from hitting that approach 1, that waypoint 1, which, like I mentioned before, is 220 meters away from the International Space Station. And we can see that the crew has their visors up. We don't require them to put their visors down until they're closer to the space station for that docking procedure. So they're still hanging out, continuing to monitor Dragon's progress. As we said before, once the 4 Axiom-2 crew members get on station, they're going to be there for 8 days, and they're going to be very busy. When you're on station, your schedule is packed with science and research, sleeping. Your sleep periods are scheduled to ensure that everybody's getting appropriate rest, your meal times, and then, of course, you have to build in some exercise time as well. But yeah, the crew will be very busy once they get on station. So these final moments before they actually arrive might actually be very calm and restful because, like we said before, the crew right now, they are monitoring, they are keeping an eye on Dragon systems, and of course keeping in contact with the integrated operations teams from all 3 mission control centers that we mentioned before. Once again, this is a live view of the International Space Station from Dragon. It almost looks fake. It's so clear and beautiful. As we get closer, you should be able to make out more clearly the various vehicles that are docked with the International Space Station. Once we get closer, I definitely want to keep an eye on to those various ports. As we mentioned, we did a port relocation maneuver for the Crew 6 capsule.
Dragon station on the Big Loop. C2V2 link reconfiguration complete.
Dragon copy. C2V2 config complete.
As I mentioned, we did a port relocation maneuver for the Crew 6 capsule, which is Dragon in Denver. It was relocated to the Node 2 forward port, and we should be able to see that as we get closer. And I just love it when there is a Dragon capsule getting a view of another Dragon capsule that is on station. We had that view during the Crew 6 docking, if I remember correctly. So this is a live view coming to us from the International Space Station of Dragon Freedom as it approaches. All right, so as we are continuing to get closer to the International Space Station, we are heading towards that waypoint 1. Let's check back in with Leah over at Johnson Space Center to hear how things are continuing to progress with the International Space Station's preparation for Dragon Freedom.
Hi, Kate. Hi, Duke. Thanks for carrying us through a little bit of that. And yes, that's no moon. That is Dragon approaching the International Space Station. As you heard, we've reached waypoint 0, that 400 meters away from the space station. We're just a little bit below that now. But as you can see, we've made quite a bit of movement. Our previous view of Dragon had the Earth in the background. Now we have space in the background. The spacecraft has moved out in front of the International Space Station, still less than 400 meters away, about 380 meters right now, but we're moving up to waypoint 1. And again, waypoint 1 is about 220 meters away from the space station. It'll be directly above that Node 2 zenith or space-facing port. We have the opportunity to pause here, check out any systems if needed, and we expect arrival at waypoint 1 in about 10 minutes. Once Dragon reaches waypoint 1, the next stop is waypoint 2. That is only 20 meters away from the International Space Station, so that's when we hope to get that crystal clear view of Dragon Freedom and its 4 crew members inside. We do conduct a hold at waypoint 2. This is to make sure that we are properly aligned with the docking target on Node 2, also known as Harmony. After reaching waypoint 2, Dragon will slowly but surely move in and dock with that port, conducting a soft capture first before the hooks begin to drive and complete a hard capture. Then it takes about 2 hours until Dragon hatches are ready to be opened and the 4 new crew members make their way aboard the space station. Now 350 meters away from the station. Again, this is Dragon Freedom. It was named that by the Crew 4 crew that visited the International Space Station. Spacecraft keep their names after being named by the crew, so this one will always carry the name Freedom regardless of who's flying on board. On the International Space Station side, things continue to move smoothly. Again, we have NASA astronaut Woody Hoberg in the cupola along with UAE astronaut Sultan Al-Nayati. They're monitoring Dragon's approach. It is a fully autonomous flight for the visiting spacecraft, meaning there is no action required on part of the crew. However, they do have the ability to take control if needed, as well as the crew aboard the space station can send commands to Dragon to retreat if necessary. But we're not expecting any of that this morning as things continue to move smoothly, now 330 meters away from the orbiting laboratory. On the space station side, the solar arrays have been configured. Again, teams here in Mission Control Houston will command the solar arrays into a position, we call it being feathered. This keeps any loads from being imparted on the solar arrays themselves from any plumes that come from Dragon as it makes those fine-tuned maneuvers. We are in a satellite handover again with the tracking data and relay satellite systems, but a great shot here of mission control at SpaceX in Hawthorne, California. Again, we are in integrated operations now that we are inside the approach ellipsoid, that 4 kilometer by 2 by 2 kilometer invisible oval that helps us monitor all of the arriving and departing spacecraft at the International Space Station. And on the right-hand side of your screen, you've got Mission Control Houston. These teams work around the clock, 24/7, to monitor all of the station's systems. Leading the teams this morning is Flight Director Marcos Flores. And communicating with the astronauts aboard the International Space Station is Capcom, or Capsule Communicator, Justin Cartledge. On the left now, you can see the Axiom Space Flight Control Room. They are monitoring the flight as well. They'll remain on console this week to help the crew members execute all of the research and the payload work that they have planned. Additionally, they'll be conducting several downlink events with various media and other STEM organizations here on Earth. Now just 290 meters away from the space station and closing in. Again, slow and steady. We are less than 1 mile per hour as we see Crew Dragon move toward the International Space Station Zenith port. Once we reach that, it'll be waypoint 1. We hope to see that in about 5 minutes, and we're tracking docking again this morning at 8:10 a.m. Central Time, so just about 20 minutes from now. So look back at what has brought Dragon to this point. Less than an hour after liftoff last night at about 5:23 p.m. Central Time, Dragon executed the phase burn. This was the first of those 5 major burns. This raised Dragon's orbit using the Draco thrusters, and about 7 hours later we had the boost burn. This put our crew in an orbit where Dragon's apogee, or the highest point of its orbit around the Earth, is 10 kilometers lower than the space station. After that, we execute the close co-elliptic burn, and this puts Dragon on an orbit roughly co-elliptic with the station. So it means it maintains that orbit about 10 kilometers lower than the station all the way around instead of just at apogee. The transfer burn occurred at about 2:47 a.m. this morning, Central Time. This is where we raised Dragon's apogee. Again, that's the highest point of its orbit, to just 2.5 kilometers lower than the station. We want to make that co-elliptic one more time, so we round that out with the final co-elliptic burn. That was at 3:34 a.m. Central this morning, maintaining the constant orbit about 2.5 kilometers below the station. We also saw the approach initiation burn just at the start of today's broadcast. This really begins the final stages of Dragon's rendezvous with the station, and we started integrated operations between the Dragon control team in Hawthorne and the space station flight controllers here in Mission Control Houston. This approach initiation brought us up to waypoint 0. Waypoint 0 is 400 meters below the station. This is the first checkpoint during the approach. We have now entered the approach ellipsoid, that first boundary of monitoring the arrival and departure of visiting vehicles. Of course, we didn't even have to hold at that 400 meters. All of the systems checked out, and Dragon has continued its approach to waypoint 1. This happens when we are about 220 meters away from the space station. We're currently 240 meters away, so we're getting very close, and that 220 meters at waypoint 1 puts us on the docking axis, meaning it's directly above the docking port. So we're heading toward the zenith port of the International Space Station's Node 2 module, also known as Harmony. Currently docked to the forward port, we have Dragon Endeavour, which brought the Crew 6 crew. So once Dragon is only 20 meters away...
on the Big Loop, approach 1 and soft capture ring extension will begin shortly. Dragon will continue approach to waypoint 2. Reminder that manual impulsive retreat recovery is not permitted.
Dragon copies.
Station copies.
And confirmation that the spacecraft has arrived at waypoint 1. Again, we have the opportunity to hold here. It's 220 meters away from the International Space Station, specifically in line with the docking axis on the zenith port of Node 2. And you can see some of those thruster plumes coming from Dragon as it fine-tunes its approach using those service section Draco thrusters. A great view of those thrusters firing on Dragon as we are at waypoint 1, 220 meters away from the International Space Station, specifically directly above the space station. And inside Dragon right now, we have our 4 private astronauts, Peggy Whitson, the commander, pilot John Schaffner, Rana Barnawi, and Ali Arkhani.
Block Bravo.
With you on the big loop.
Cry range 208 meters and decreasing attitude as expected.
We copy and concur from the ground.
Beautiful view for a moment there. We have of Dragon, this courtesy of Cronus. Cronus flight controller here this morning is Brian Crisp in Mission Control Houston. Dragon's thrusters continue to fire. We are now less than 200 meters away from the space station. We have passed through waypoint 1 as well as the keep out sphere. And the keep out sphere is that 200 meter radius around the International Space Station, another invisible boundary that helps us monitor our arriving and departing vehicles. The next pause for Dragon will be at waypoint 2. This is a hold point. That's the 20 meters away from the International Space Station when we move in toward final docking. In this view of Dragon Freedom, you can see the hatch or the nose cone is opened and a good view of those 4 forward bulkhead thrusters. Those are used for the larger burns. We are now using the 12 service section Draco thrusters. These are for more fine-tuned attitude maneuvers, especially as we get closer to the International Space Station. The nose cone protects those thrusters as well as the docking mechanisms aboard Dragon. We're expecting arrival at waypoint 2 in about 8 minutes. And again, looking for docking this morning at approximately 8:10 a.m. Central Time. Dragon Freedom is now 164 meters away from the International Space Station. So while we are moving less than 1 mile per hour, we are continuing to close in on the destination for the Ax-2 crew.
SpaceX Dragon on the big blue. Visors are closed for all 4 crews.
Copy, Dragon. Visors are closed.
As we've mentioned earlier, the Ax-2 crew are in their suits and in their seats. We got that view over their shoulders this morning. They do not have to wear their suits for the entirety of the flight. When they are not in these dynamic operations periods, they are welcome to take those off and get into some more comfortable attire specifically for their sleep portion of their flight. However, now they are in their suits. They've conducted suit leak checks through the umbilicals that connect to the spacecraft itself. These also provide communications and cooling for the astronauts. And as you heard Commander Peggy Whitson just report down to the ground, the visors have been closed on the suits, so they are preparing for docking. And again, we're looking for that about 10 minutes from now. We do have some time and some hold time that we can conduct at waypoint 2 if needed. We can wait until lighting conditions are preferred for Dragon to move in for its final docking. Once Dragon flies in and makes contact with the International Docking Adapter, we will have soft capture. This is when the soft capture ring retracts, and sensors will indicate it's time for 12 hooks to drive in place. Once those hooks have fully driven, we'll have hard capture, and that firmly secures Dragon to its new home on the space station. Now just 130 meters from the International Space Station, everything continuing to move smoothly for Dragon.
Station on the Big Loop, our review of steps 5 and 6 is complete and ISS is ready for docking.
Houston copies.
We are in another satellite handover and expect to regain video of the crew aboard Dragon as well as from the International Space Station shortly. However, things
Dragon
continuing
station
to
on the
check
Big
out
Loop,
here.
soft capture ring extension complete.
Dragon copy.
Station copies.
Station Houston on the Big Loop. At waypoint 2, Dragon will briefly pause to align for docking, then automatically resume approach.
Station copies.
We are less than 100 meters from the International Space Station. Currently, Flight Director Marcos Flores here in Mission Control Houston is polling all of the team members in this room, conducting their go, no-go poll for docking. Just heard confirmation
Dragon
that
station
Mission Control
on the
Houston
Big
is
Loop.
go.
Confirm crew readiness for final approach. Ground has pulled go for approach 2 and will be commanding approach allowed shortly. As a reminder that once Dragon is inside the crew hands-off point, retreat and breakout are not permitted.
And the Dragon crew is ready to go for docking, and we copy on the crew hands-off point.
Station crew copies and we are ready for final approach.
A lot of voices in the mix there, the last one being from NASA astronaut Woody Hoberg, who's in the cupola monitoring docking this morning. And good words from all of the teams that they are go for docking. Dragon is now less than 60 meters away from the International Space Station. We're expecting arrival at waypoint 2 in 2 minutes. Again, that'll be the 20 meters away from the International Space Station, directly above the Node 2 Zenith docking port. We do have a pause at waypoint 2, and they can hold there for an extended period of time if need be, if they want to wait for lighting conditions to change or to check out systems any further. However, things continuing to look good this morning. Currently, the International Space Station and Dragon are flying 262 statute miles over Russia in an orbital nighttime. Dragon now 34 meters away from the International Space Station. We also heard confirmation earlier from teams here on the ground that the soft capture ring is properly extended. This will be the first step in the docking process. Dragon will make contact with the International Space Station, and that docking ring, or the soft capture ring, will retract, pulling it in until it's time for the 2 sets of 6 hooks, so 12 hooks in total, to make the hard capture to the International Space Station. Standing by for arrival at waypoint 2. Dragon Freedom and the Ax-2 crew have arrived at waypoint 2, just 20 meters from the International Space Station. Teams here are all on the ground are all go for docking, as well as aboard the International Space Station and Dragon itself. Again, this graphic just a look at what we have seen so far, most recently this morning when Dragon arrived at waypoint 0, 400 meters away from the space station, moving into waypoint 1, 220 meters directly above and on the docking axis. We have now moved down from that 220 meters into just 20 meters from the International Space Station, directly above the Node 2 Zenith port. This is a hold point for Dragon.
Houston, on the big loop, Dragon is on final approach and is go for docking. Monitor per steps 5 and 6 in 1.102, Dragon approach and retreat monitoring.
Station copies, in work.
Again, we do not have video feed from the International Space Station or Dragon at this time, but teams continue to monitor its approach to the space station itself. We have now left that waypoint 2 hold point of 20 meters away, now about 16 meters from the International Space Station. Dragon Freedom and the Ax-2 crew now moving at 0.2 miles per hour. All 4 crew members suited and in their seats, preparing for docking.
Meters.
Copy, 10 meters.
As you can hear, the Dragon crew are able to view the status of their docking on the crew display screens, reporting that they are now 10 meters and actually less than 10 meters away from the Node 2 Zenith or space-facing port on the International Space Station.
Meters.
Copy, 5 meters.
Still moving 0.2 miles per hour, Dragon Freedom is now 5 meters away from the International Space Station. Again, we do not have video feed of the spacecraft at this time, but team members are able to track its status, and everything continues to go as planned. The crew is now 3 meters from the space station.
Meters, chop.
Copy, 2 meters.
Hands off.
CHOP stands for the crew hands-off point, now 2 meters from the station, standing by for
1
docking.
meter.
Copy, 1 meter. Soft capture confirmed.
And we have confirmation that the Axiom-2 crew has docked to the International Space Station at
retraction in
8:12
progress.
a.m. Central Time. That self-capture ring now beginning to retract and pull Dragon in toward the International Space Station. Docking coming as the space station itself was flying 262 statute miles northeast of Japan.
And correction on last, we're still waiting on attenuation.
Continuing to get good reports here from teams on the ground. Again, aboard the International Space Station, NASA's Woody Hoberg and UAE's Sultan Al Nayati continued to monitor the crew as well. After soft capture is complete, those 12 hooks will begin to drive and pull Dragon firmly securing it to the Node 2 Zenith port.
And Dragon, now we have ring retraction in progress.
Dragon copy. That's the softest docking I've ever had.
Good words from commander of the Ax-2 mission, former NASA astronaut Peggy Whitson, now flying her third spacecraft after having flown the Space Shuttle, a Roscosmos-Soyuz, and now a SpaceX Dragon. That soft capture ring continues to retract. Again, this is the first stage in docking. Shortly after ring retraction is complete, we will move into the hard docking portion. This is when those 12 hooks, 2 sets of 6, drive and firmly secure the spacecraft to the Node 2 Zenith port. Again, just a few weeks ago, the Node 2 Zenith port was occupied by another SpaceX Dragon. Dragon was relocated by the Crew 6 crew who arrived on that spacecraft from the forward port, or from the Zenith port where Dragon Freedom now is, to the forward port. Again, we expect the Axiom-2 crew to live and work aboard the International Space Station for about 8 days before beginning their return journey to Earth.
Ring retraction complete. Docking sequence is holding for MCS reconfiguration.
We have confirmation that the ring retraction is complete. Next steps for this hard capture will be for those 12 hooks to drive. In addition to the ring retraction and these hooks driving, an umbilical will also be connected from Dragon to the International Space Station. This will allow power to flow from the space station to Dragon itself so that Dragon is no longer relying on battery power, that power being gathered from the solar cells around the base of its trunk. Again, we are in a handover of our satellites for KU, which is what brings down our video. We do have audio communication with the crew through our S-band.
MCS configured, proceeding with hook driving.
Teams reporting that we are properly configured for hard capture. Again, this is 12 hooks, 2 sets of 6. They will drive the first 6, and once those are firmly latched, they will then drive the next 6. We do see those first 6 hooks now starting to drive. The first 6 hooks continue to drive in the hard capture process. Again, after these, we'll have another set of 6 before we can officially declare that Dragon is firmly secured to the International Space Station. Everything continuing to go as planned this morning. Again, docking coming at 8:12 a.m. Central Time. We have confirmation that the first set of 6 hooks have now closed and the second set are driving. Again, this view from Mission Control Houston as teams are monitoring the docking of Dragon Freedom to the Node 2
Station
Zenith or
on the Big Loop
space-facing
on behalf
port.
of the Expedition 69 crew. Peggy, welcome back. John, welcome to the International Space Station. And Ali and Rihanna, ahlan wa sahlan.
Thank you so much for the Ax-2 crew. We're really looking forward to working with you guys this week.
Likewise, we'll see you guys very soon.
And we have confirmation the second set of hooks has closed from Dragon on the International Space Station, meaning hard capture is complete.
Dragon Station, hard capture complete.
I can copy.
And with that call, hard capture is complete. Dragon is firmly attached to the International Space Station. It's home for at least the next 8 days. NASA astronaut Woody Hoberg on the space station side will now move into preparing the hatches for opening. Again, that takes about a 2-hour process. The vestibule needs to be pressurized, the area in between the space station and Dragon. Coming up, the Ax-2 crew will have the chance to doff or take off their spacesuits, maybe get into their flight suits before they float aboard, and we begin our welcome ceremony.
And Dragon SpaceX docking sequence complete. Crew Dragon Freedom, Peggy, John, Ali, Ray, congrats on this historic achievement. Welcome to the International Space Station.
Thanks. We really appreciated flying with SpaceX. It was a lovely ride, and as I mentioned, it was the softest docking I've ever felt. Very well done. Thanks to everyone for getting us this far.
Thanks, Peggy. We do aim for excellence, and on behalf of SpaceX, it's been a pleasure working with you. And just a little bit of trivia for you, this was the fastest launch to dock time for a Crew Dragon, beating our previous record from Crew 4 by just 9 minutes. Ground will be enabling hardline power and comm connection shortly, and you are good to doff suits per procedure 4.012. Ground will be taking cameras external.
Copy 4012 in work.
Dragon on Dragon to ground, no response required. Cameras are external.
Now that all the hooks have driven and the soft capture ring has been stowed, docking is officially complete. The crew is go to doff their suits. That's why the teams on the ground have told them that the cameras are not live at this time inside the cabin. Again, we still do not have video from the International Space Station at this time. It looks like we'll regain that shortly. The space station itself is in an orbital nighttime, now flying 261 statute miles over the Pacific Ocean. Again, docking this morning at 8:12 a.m. Central Time. As noted by SpaceX, the fastest docking on record for a crew launch to the International Space Station on Dragon. We also have confirmation that the umbilicals have attached from Dragon to the International Space Station. Again, these allow power to flow from the space station to Dragon, as well as data and other telemetry. When in free flight, Dragon uses power gained from its solar arrays and is stored and used from batteries aboard the spacecraft, so connecting to these umbilicals allows it to rely on power generated from the space station. We'll stay live now that we have docked until our welcome ceremony, standing by for the start time for that ceremony. But this hatch open process takes about 2 hours. A look ahead at the steps that will be happening over the next couple of hours. Again, Woody Hoberg, NASA astronaut on the space station, is prime for these operations and bringing the Ax-2 crew on board. Now that we're docked, he is securing some hardware, and then we'll move into hatch operations. First, he will open the large hatch at Node 2 Zenith. That'll give him access inside the pressurized mating adapter. He will then help pressurize the vestibule. That's, again, the small space between the hatches on Dragon and the space station. Of course, this was previously exposed to a vacuum prior to docking. We need to fill it with air, make sure its pressure is nearly equal with the atmospheric pressures on Dragon and the station.
Tom check on the cabin mic.
And Dragon SpaceX, I had you 5x5 on the cabin mic, but I am seeing that you have both ground and ISS set to PTT. Please set it to only the big loop.
Okay, on the big loop, cabin mic set from Dragon.
And I have you 5x5. How me?
5x5, thanks.
station on 2 for PMA 3 ingress step 1.
Houston is with you on 2.
All right, just looking for your go in step 1.1.
Standby 1, and we are checking on that now.
Station copies.
As you heard, teams on the ground communicating with the crew still aboard Dragon Freedom. Peggy Whitson took a chance to test out the cabin mic rather than the microphones they'd been using
Station
in their
Houston
seats
on the
now
big
that
loop.
they've
You are
doffed
go
those.
for 1.1 of procedure 2.102.
Copy, go in step 1.1 of 2.102.
And that voice being NASA astronaut Woody Hoberg communicating with Justin Cartledge here on the ground, his Capcom, the capsule communicator. That's the person speaking with the astronauts aboard the International Space Station. Woody is now stepping through some procedures, including he will get access inside the pressurized mating adapter and then pressurize the vestibule. We want to make sure the pressure is almost equal with the pressures on board Dragon and the station. He'll use a small valve on the station's hatch to slowly introduce air into the vestibule. Flight controllers here in Houston will monitor the pressure and temperature readings inside and verify that everything is leak-free before we get ready to open the hatches. Again, it's about a 2-hour process to get everything pressurized and checked out before we open the hatches. And following that hatch open, we'll have a welcoming ceremony with all 4 Ax-2 astronauts, as well as our 7 crew members living aboard the station. So if it's not too early for you to do some math, yes, that is 11 people that'll be living aboard the International Space Station for at least the next week.
Houston Station, node 2 overhead, hatch open.
Houston copies.
Again, we are live covering the arrival of the Ax-2 crew to the International Space Station. This is the second private astronaut mission that has visited the International Space Station following Axiom 1 flight last year. Our crew members aboard Dragon Freedom today include former NASA astronaut Peggy Whitson. Up until now, she has spent 665 days in space, so she's looking to add to that total. It's more than any U.S. astronaut and more than any woman in the world. She's joined by pilot John Schaffner. And the 2 mission specialists representing the Saudi Space Commission are Ali Al-Karni and Rayana Barnawi.
Houston Station on 2, we're ready for step 2.2 on your go.
Checking. You are go at 2.2.
Copy, go.
As we hear NASA astronaut Woody Hoberg stepping through the procedures with the ground's go, he will begin pressurizing the vestibule shortly. In the meantime, NASA astronaut Frank Rubio continues to conduct some hardware servicing on the space
Dragon,
station.
SpaceX on the big loop. If desired, reference procedure 4.400 for monitoring vestibule pressurization.
Confirmation from teams on the ground that vestibule pressurization has begun. Again, this is the small space between the Dragon hatch and the space station hatch. We want to bring that up from vacuum to about 14.7 psi. That's about the same pressure as the International Space Station, approximately the same pressure we're used to here on Earth. Astronauts on the space station live in a mixed nitrogen-oxygen environment, again, very similar to what we have on Earth.
And Dragon station on the big loop, no response required. ISS power connection established.
Houston, station on 2, step 2.4, A pass pressure equalized at 13:39 GMT.
Houston copies 13:39 GMT.
You can see some movement, and we have our view back of Dragon. As we see a sunrise in the background, this view of Dragon Freedom with the Ax-2 crew aboard docked to the Node 2 Zenith port on the International Space Station. Again, that docking coming at 8:12 a.m. Central Time. The crew inside are now out of their suits. They are preparing for ingress to the International Space Station. Again, this is a process though, so we are pressurizing the vestibule, the space between the two spacecraft. And if you see some color changes, that's because the International Space Station and Dragon are now flying into an orbital sunrise. They are 268 statute miles over the South Pacific Ocean. Now that they're docked, these two will travel 17,500 miles per hour together, seeing 16 sunrises and sunsets a day. So the Ax-2 crew is certainly in for a treat for their planned 8-day stay. Here in Mission Control Houston, teams are handing over from the Orbit 1 shift to the Orbit 2 shift. We have had Marcos Flores as our flight director this morning. He will be handing over to Vincent Laporte. Again, Woody Hoberg aboard the International Space Station is leading the team's...
Freedom, Houston, stand by for hardline audio config.
Freedom is standby.
NASA astronaut Woody Hoberg working to pressurize the vestibule, the space between the hatches. Again, this takes about 2 hours before the crew members float aboard the International Space Station. All 4 Axiom 2 crew members still in Dragon Freedom, as you see there, docked to the Node 2 Zenith port. Once they float aboard, they will conduct a welcome ceremony with all crew members before heading into a safety briefing. These private astronauts trained for many contingency scenarios down here on the ground, but the teams aboard the International Space Station will help show them different locations and procedures now that they are on orbit. Later today, the Dragon Freedom crew will work to transfer some cargo from Dragon to the International Space Station. That includes some of the scientific research they'll be doing this week, as well as hardware or food needed.
Freedom Houston on the big loop for a comm check. Hardline audio configuration is complete.
Freedom has you loud and clear on the big loop hard line.
Good news.
And Dragon SpaceX on the big loop, permission to come on board with cameras.
come on board now, but we'll probably have to ask you to go away again in a little bit. Welcome aboard.
Copy that. We'll keep them exterior until you're ready.
Okay, thank you.
Recently, you heard a call from Mission Control in Hawthorne at SpaceX headquarters, checking with the crew to see if they could turn cameras on the spacecraft. They'll hold off for a little bit longer on that, but we still have all 4 crew members aboard. It has now been 41 minutes since they docked to the Node 2 Zenith port, making their official arrival at the International Space Station. On the space station side, NASA astronaut Woody Hoberg is preparing the APAS hatch for opening.
And SpaceX Dragon on the big loop, just to let you know, we've got all four suits drying. The shortest timer is at passing 7 minutes right now.
Copy all. 4 suits drying, and 7 minutes have elapsed. And Dragon with suits drying, I can give you a go for sections 1 through 3 of 4.400.
Copy 1 through 3 of 4.400.
Again, you're watching live coverage of the Ax-2 crew arrival at the International Space Station. The crew docked Dragon Freedom to the Node 2 Zenith-facing port this morning at 8:12 a.m. Central Time.
Dragon,
And that
this
view
is Ray for food inventory and water inventory.
Copy that, Ray. Ready to copy for inventory.
203, 5 bottles. 207, 4 bottles. For food, 305, 1 meal and a snack. 313, 1 meal and a snack. 307, 1 meal and a snack. 315, 1 meal and a snack.
Copy that. And to read back, we have 5 bottles from 203, 4 bottles from 207, 1 meal and 1 snack from locations 305, 313, 307, and 315.
Good copy. Thank you.
Thank you.
As you just heard, Saudi Space Commission astronaut Rayana Barnawi reporting out the inventory aboard Crew Dragon. Everything is meticulously tracked aboard the space station and Dragon as well, so she was reporting which meals and snacks had been consumed during their approximate 16-hour flight from launch last night at 5:37 p.m. Eastern Time to docking this morning at 9:12 a.m. Eastern Time. Again, you're watching live coverage of the Ax-2 arrival at the International Space Station, the second private astronaut mission to visit the space station following the Axiom 1 flight last year. Currently aboard Dragon Freedom, which you see on your screen, attached to the station's Node 2 Zenith port, are Commander Peggy Whitson, pilot John Schaffner, and mission specialists Ali Alkarni and Rihanna Barnawi. On the space station side, NASA astronaut Woody Hoberg is working to
And
pressurize
Dragon
the...
SpaceX on the big loop for procedure 4.400.
Go for 4.400.
Hey, so we're getting close to finishing the leak check, but you have a go to perform Section 5 for the dock waste system configuration.
Okay, go for Section 5. We'll try and get all the other activities out of the way first and get that in March.
Copy all.
We heard Peggy Whitson earlier say that the crew has doffed their suits. They are now in probably their flight suits ahead of heading into the International Space Station. We're expecting that around 10 a.m. Central Time for those hatches to open. They are drying their suits currently, just keeping them in good shape ahead of a trip home. They're planning on about an 8-day stay aboard the International Space Station. However, several things can affect that departure date, mainly the weather at the landing location. SpaceX has a number of select landing locations off the coast of Florida. And we watch for things like wave height or wave cadence, as well as wind speeds, to ensure that the crew have the safest and most comfortable landing possible.
Station Houston, on the big loop, we have a good leak check. ISS is go to complete vestibule equalization and open the APAS hatch at step 3.1 of procedure 2.102.
All right, station copies go in 3.1.
For those of you just joining our coverage of Axiom-2 crew in our SpaceX Dragon Freedom capsule, which is what you see there on your screen, has successfully docked to the International Space Station. In fact, we had a new record time for SpaceX operations. We actually beat the Crew 4 record from liftoff to soft capture. Our record time now is about 15 hours and 35 minutes from liftoff to soft capture. So basically the most efficient and fastest transit to the International Space Station from Pad 39A. That's a beautiful view there of that Dragon Freedom capsule. This is docked at the Node 2 Zenith port. The Crew 6 capsule, until about a couple weeks ago, was docked to this same port, and we did a port relocation maneuver with the Crew 6 crew to move it down to the Node 2 forward port. By doing so, we were able to clear this Zenith port for the Ax-2 mission, as well as the upcoming CRS-28 cargo resupply mission. Although it might look stagnant if you look at it quickly, we can see planet Earth rotating slowly behind, or rather under, the Dragon capsule and the International Space Station. There at the bottom of the screen, you can kind of make out the Canada arm, which is the robotic arm that the crew on board station will utilize in order to remove cargo from the unpressurized section of Dragon located in the trunk, which is essentially the top half, in this orientation, the top half of the Dragon capsule. Of course, when we are sitting at the launch pad or other conventional views of Dragon, it's the bottom half of Dragon. But really, it's that half black, half white cylindrical portion of Dragon that we see there. This view is also great because you get a really clear view of the nose cone and all of the hardware that the nose cone protects during the launch phase. Of course, we got some ambient noise here at SpaceX headquarters as our first shift operations are well underway. During the ascent phase, that nose cone will be closed, and that protects the forward hatch as well as the forward bulkhead Draco thrusters. So right now, the Axiom-2 crew, they have taken their suits off. We heard the call out earlier that the suits are drying. And as you can see, the Dragon capsule is docked, and they have completed pressurization of the APAS hatch. So we are making great progress. But talking about the crew, let's get to learn a little bit more about them in case you may have missed our introductions earlier in the broadcast, as we've been going for a little bit while. So let's learn more about the Ax-2 crew.
Yeah, it's always good to get a little refresher on our Ax-2 crew here. The Ax-2 mission is commanded by retired NASA astronaut Peggy Whitson. Born and raised in Beaconsfield, Iowa, she was inspired along with the world when she watched the Apollo 11 crew walk on the moon. She has since become the most experienced American astronaut and one of the most decorated. Whitson flew 3 long-duration missions to the ISS and has more cumulative time in space, 665 days, than any U.S. astronaut and more than any woman in the world. She has conducted 10 spacewalks with over 60 hours of time and has performed hundreds of research experiments on board the ISS. Not only is she the commander for this mission, but Peggy also serves as the director of human spaceflight for Axiom Space.
The pilot for Ax-2 is private astronaut John Schaffner. Born in Alaska and raised in Kentucky, Schaffner is a STEAM education advocate, business pioneer, and lifelong space enthusiast. A pilot since the age of 17, John has over 8,500 flight hours holding commercial, instrument, single-engine, and multi-engine ratings in land and sea aircraft, as well as helicopter. He also holds ratings in former military jets and high-performance radial engine aircraft. As an athlete, John has years of competitive experience in water skiing, cycling, whitewater kayaking, hang gliding, skydiving, and base jumping. John trained as the Ax-1 backup pilot, and during this mission on Ax-2, plans to invest a lot of his time in STEAM education activities aimed at empowering educators and inspiring teachers.
And representing the Saudi Space Commission and serving as a mission specialist, Ali Al-Qarni was born in March 1992 in Sabt al-Alaya, Saudi Arabia. Ali is fluent in English as well as his native Arabic, and as an Air Force captain, has 12 years of experience flying on multiple aircraft, primarily on the F-15SA in service to the Royal Saudi Air Force. Ali graduated with a Bachelor of Aerospace Science degree in 2013 from King Faisal Air Academy in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia.
Also representing the Saudi Space Commission and serving as a mission specialist, Rayana Barnawi, or as we hear her identify herself as Ray on comms, was born in September 1988 in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. Rayana has a master's degree in biomedical sciences from Al Faisal University in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and a bachelor's degree in biomedical sciences from Otago University in Dunedin, New Zealand. She is fluent in English and Turkish, as well as native Arabic. She has been a research lab technician since 2013 in the Stem Cell and Tissue Re-Engineering Program at King Faisal Specialist Hospital and Research Center, and located in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia.
And there they are, the Ax-2 crew. We are so excited for them to now be docked to the ISS, and so proud that they've made it this far after all their training. This is a really wonderful moment to be celebrating their journey to space.
Yeah, obviously Peggy, a NASA legend, has spent years training to go to space. Our 3 formerly space newbies, now that they are up there and now docked to the International Space Station. Can't really call them rookies anymore. But yeah, all 4 of them have been training extensively for this mission, and it's so great to see that they get to use it now.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And on those cards, you may have seen their patch on their flight suits. And since the beginning of the space race in the 1960s, a custom patch has been used to represent and identify individual missions and their crews. It's also a long-held custom that these crews influence or even outright design their own patches, injecting them with symbolism and personal elements to commemorate their journey. This crew has continued this long-standing tradition with their official Ax-2 mission patch, so let's take a look. The Ax-2 mission patch highlights the beauty of space, hope for the future.
Station on 2, the pass hatch is open with negative condensation.
Oh.
That is great news.
Houston copies.
Sounds like a hatch open update. Okay, continuing on this patch. This patch highlights the beauty of space, hope for the future, and the important role of the ISS to unite the best aspects of humanity. Shown prominently are the mission name, Ax-2, the family names of the crew members, and the flags of the United States and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the two nations represented on board today's flight. There are 5 shapes drawn as constellations, and these represent the crew's intention to focus on inspiration, education, and teaching through STEAM education initiatives. And so there's a constellation for science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. The arched path leading from Earth to space is colored lavender, which is culturally significant in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, symbolizing hospitality. That arched path and color also reflect KSA's desire to be part of the space sector and position itself as a contributor to the global space community. Then, naturally, the space station is central to the image as the destination of this crew, while Earth is featured with prominent horizon lines symbolizing optimism, hope, and inspiration. Just as you see this mission patch worn by the crew on their flight suits, this patch is currently adorning the walls of Axiom Space's mission control in Houston and is placed in a position of honor everywhere this crew is being supported for the duration of their mission.
As someone that is an engineer, but I have a background in music and theater and art, I have a personal appreciation for just how evident and apparent the emphasis on STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, mathematics. It's been a long morning. I think I got those letters in the right order. But yeah, it's so great to see all of that represented so strongly on the Ax-2 mission patch. I love it. It's one of my favorite mission patches that we've had. Now let's turn it back over to NASA's Leah Cheshire, who is standing by at Mission Control Center at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas, for an update on space station operations. Leah?
Thanks, Kate and Duke. Yes, we are still here in International Space Station Flight Control Room at Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas, continuing to monitor the arrival of the Ax-2 crew and their eventual welcome to the International Space Station. Again, we docked at 8:12 a.m. Central Time this morning, so a little over an hour ago, to the Node 2 Zenith, or space-facing port, which is where you see the crew now. They are flying over the country of Chad, 256 miles above Earth. And those calls you heard about the hatch, those are the APAS hatch and the vestibule hatch. NASA astronaut Woody Hoberg is stepping through hatch procedures this morning. He's currently in the APAS hatch, and I looked it up to make sure to get it right for all of you. APAS stands for Androgynous Peripheral Assembly System. I think it's pretty clear why we call it APAS, keep it short and sweet. But that hatch has been opened. He is inside, and he has also opened the vestibule hatch. So the Dragon hatch is not open yet. We've still got some things that we need to work through on the SpaceX side as well as on the NASA side to make sure that we're ready to welcome the Ax-2 crew members aboard. After launch yesterday at 5:37 p.m. Eastern Time, Dragon made its way to the International Space Station, conducting a series of burns and checkpoints along the way. This view inside the International Space Station, you're getting a look at NASA astronaut Woody Hoberg. This is his first flight to the space station. He arrived as a member of Crew 6 earlier this year. He is preparing the space station for entry of the Ax-2 crew. As you can see, he's working on some venting. That tube will go from the space station into Dragon and kind of help equalize the and balance out the air and the mix of the air that's in the space station to what's currently in Dragon. Again, the Dragon hatch is not open yet. We are remaining live all the way through their welcome ceremony when we see the 4 crew members, Peggy Whitson, John Schaffner, Lee Alcarney, and Rihanna Barnawi, float aboard the International Space Station for the start of their approximately 8-day stay. While aboard the space station, the Ax-2 crew members are going to conduct a plethora of scientific research, as well as conduct STEAM outreach with students and other educational organizations here on Earth. And again, they dock to the Node 2 Zenith port. This is where the Crew 6 Dragon, known as Endeavour, was docked just a few weeks ago. However, it was moved from one hatch to the next.
Houston
So
and
we have 2
SpaceX
Dragons, both docked to Node 2.
Ascent is ready for Dragon hatch equalization.
Houston copies on the big loop. Stand by for equalization. Expect to take 3 minutes. Additionally, ground is a little bit behind on configurations, so expect a slight delay for hatch opening.
Station copies.
Dragon copies.
As NASA astronaut Woody Hoberg gets things ready on the station side, the Ax-2 crew is still aboard Dragon, and they continue to have some steps that they're working through as well. We heard Peggy Whitson discuss the suit drying that's going on, as well as Rihanna Barnawi reported down some of the consumables that had been used during the flight, including meals that were eaten. Everything is meticulously tracked aboard Dragon as well as aboard the International Space Station to make sure that it can be accessed when needed. But we are moving along pretty smoothly this morning toward hatch opening. The International Space Station uses GMT as their time zone, so it's about 2:28 p.m. Pacific, to be specific, aboard the International Space Station right now. So Crew members are in the middle of their workday, most of them taking...
Section 5 is complete for the waste configuration.
And copy that, Peggy. Section 5 complete. Any deltas to inventory?
Looking at our timeline, some of the crew members on the space station side are enjoying their midday meal. Of course, after floating aboard, we'll see the Ax-2 crew move into their welcome ceremony, where they get to spend a little time with the other 7 crew members on the International Space Station and discuss their initial reactions to being on orbit and visiting the orbiting laboratory. Afterward, they'll step into their safety briefing and make sure that everyone is aware of the location of any certain safety items aboard the International Space Station, as well as what to do in any event of a contingency. After the safety briefing, the the Dragon Freedom astronauts, the Ax-2 crew, will begin moving some of the cargo from Dragon into the International Space Station side.
Station Dragon Houston on the Big Loop. Big picture update based on what we see for open ground and crew actions. We see that we're about 15 minutes out from hatch opening.
Dragon copies 15 minutes out.
And station copies 15 minutes.
Teams on the ground and teams on the space station continuing to step through their procedures, working toward hatch opening in approximately 15 minutes.
And Dragon
We are
SpaceX
in a
on 2 for
teacher's
status. Hey, was just wondering, do we have a change to inventory due to the waste system flush?
And you have a change to what?
Yeah, to our inventory for water bottles consumed?
No, we actually planned for the change in inventory, but since then, I pulled out one more bottle out of the same bag and 9 that still had bottles left. Actually, make it 2 more. John wants to grab one too.
And copy that. That's 2 bottles from which location?
Section 9, bag 204.
Copy that. 2 bottles from 204. And just checking in, are we able to come back on board with cameras?
Just another minute, please.
Copy that.
We're about 10 minutes away from Dragon hatch opening. International Space Station and Dragon are 261 statute miles over Kazakhstan, about to enter into an orbital nighttime. Again, we see 16 sunrises and sunsets a day, so anticipating another one of those in just a few minutes. You'll see some of the lighting change if we have views outside of the spacecraft. But again, we are tracking about 9:45 a.m. Central Time for Dragon hatch opening. We'll see the Ax-2 crew members float into the capsule and then begin the welcome ceremony. Again, we are in a TDRS handover, meaning we do not have KU band. That is the antenna we use to bring down our video from the International Space Station. So we are anticipating the crew to float through the Dragon hatch at about 9:45 a.m. Central Time. We anticipate having good video at that time, so we'll get to welcome those 4 crew members aboard and see their smiling faces now that they've arrived at the space station.
SpaceX Dragon on 2, you can come on board.
Copy that, Peggy. Bringing cameras back on board.
SpaceX Dragon. The first two suits are dry, but we're just going to hold on packing them until after the event, if that sounds right to you.
Yeah, copy that, Peggy. We'd recommend opening the hatch first and then possibly completing the task for stowing the suits before ingressing into ISS.
Okay, copy. Will do.
This is a view of Mission Control Space at SpaceX in Hawthorne, California. These teams have been monitoring the flight of Dragon Freedom since launch yesterday afternoon, actually before launch yesterday afternoon. That launch coming at 5:37 p.m. Eastern Time from Florida. A flawless launch, and then about a 16-hour rendezvous to the International Space Station. We got into integrated operations earlier this morning once we crossed through the approach ellipsoid, a 4 by 2 by 2 kilometer invisible boundary around the space station that helps us govern visiting spacecraft and their arrival and departure. Teams here in Mission Control Houston, now on your screen, are being led by Vincent Lacourt, Flight Director. They're working with astronauts aboard the International Space Station and staff this room 24/7, 365 to ensure that those astronauts and the space station systems remain supported. We've had continuous presence aboard the International Space Station for over 23 years now. And we'll be welcoming 4 crew members shortly as part of the Ax-2 mission, the second private astronaut mission to the International Space Station. This view coming from their mission control, also here in Houston, Texas. They'll remain on console all week to monitor the status of the astronauts, as well as help them step through their research, payloads, and any downlink opportunities that they have. And we're expecting to regain video communications with the space station and Dragon shortly. Just a few moments from now, we'll see the Ax-2 crew float through the hatch and bring our total of crew members living on the space station to 11. Everything looking good ahead of hatch opening on both sides, the station and Dragon. We're just standing by to regain video communications before we go for that hatch open so we can ensure we'll see the smiling faces of our 4 new crew members joining the Expedition 69 crew on the International Space Station. Again, we expect them to stay for about a week before returning on Dragon Freedom back to Earth.
In Dragon SpaceX on the Big Loop, S-band will be deactivated shortly. Dragon to ground will no longer be available for comms. Please verify PTT destinations are set to ISS.
Wilco.
Teams in Hawthorne speaking with the crew still aboard Dragon Freedom, letting them know that shortly they will not have the ability to communicate from or through the Dragon to ground loop itself. However, they will start using the loops aboard the International Space Station to talk with teams here in Mission Control Houston as well as in Hawthorne. Again, we are getting close to hatch opening. Docking this morning occurring at 8:12 a.m. Central Time, so about an hour and a half ago. It was a very smooth ride to orbit yesterday, launching at 5:37 p.m. Eastern Time, and then again about a 16-hour transit, the fastest on record for a Dragon crew to the International Space Station. Take a look inside Dragon Freedom as the crew members of Ax-2.
We have all the suits stowed and see procedure 40.12 complete.
Copy all, Peggy. 4.012 complete.
Again, this view of the crew inside Dragon Freedom, our 4 astronauts who have arrived as part of Axiom Mission 2, the second private mission to the International Space Station. Up in the center of the screen, still sort of in her seat, that's former NASA astronaut Peggy Whitson, the commander of this crew. Over near the window, you can see Ali Al-Karni, representing the Saudi Space Commission. Down below him, holding onto one of the footrests, is John Schaffner, the pilot. And just off camera, you can see her hand right now. That's Rayana Barnawi, also representing the Saudi Space Commission. We are standing by for hatch opening of Dragon Freedom.
No.
Again, you're looking live inside Dragon Freedom as we prepare for the hatch to be opened and these 4 crew members to float into the International Space Station on what is the second private astronaut mission to the orbiting laboratory. They will remain at the space station for about 8 days before undocking and returning to Earth. While they're on board, we will have a total of 11 people living and working aboard the space station. Again, this crew launched at 5:37 p.m. Eastern Time yesterday, docking this morning at 9:12 a.m. Eastern Time. The hatches are configured to be open, so we are just standing by for that final go call to the crew. We'll remain on air through their welcome ceremony, where you get to hear some words from the crew themselves on their flight, as well as what they plan for this time on board. Afterwards, we will wrap our show as the crew steps into their safety briefings and eventually gets to work aboard the space station.
Dragon SpaceX on 2 for hatch open.
Go for Dragon.
Hey Peggy, so just big picture. Following hatch open, we'd like you to complete Part C of 2.102 prior to station ingress. We're still ahead of the timeline, so we've got some time to complete these tasks in the nominal sequence. With that, you are go for hatch opening per decal, followed by the remaining actions in procedure 4.400, section 6.
Copy. Hatch open per decal and section C.
That's affirmative, Peggy, and section 6 of 4.400 as well.
Yes, copy. Section 6 of 4.400 as well. Thank you.
And we've got a view here in Dragon Freedom as Ali Al-Karni works to open the Dragon side of the hatch. On the other side of the Dragon hatch is NASA astronaut Woody Hoburg waiting to welcome the crew on board after having completed all of the preparations this morning.
and SpaceX. Dragon hatch is open.
Houston copies.
SpaceX copies.
At 10 a.m. Central Time, the Dragon hatch is open, preparing to see our crew members float through and join the International Space Station.
Houston, the IMV duct is installed and we are ready for IMV activation.
Houston copies.
Again, Dragon hatch open at 10 a.m. Central Time after docking at 8:12 a.m. Central Time, following their approximately 16-hour journey from the space coast of Florida to the International Space Station.
And Houston Station in the Dragon, we're at step 6.3, ready for the procedures for the Lyle.
Copy that, Peggy. Houston is checking. Dragon Houston, on the big loop, you have a go for step 6.3 and procedure 2.102.
Go for 6.3, 2.102. Thanks.
Again, we are preparing for the Ax-2 crew to float through the Dragon hatch and join the space station crew. On the right-hand side of your screen, you see NASA astronaut Woody Hoberg, who has monitored their arrival this morning, first in the cupola, and then worked to prepare these hatches, pressurizing the vestibule, that space between both hatches, and eventually assisting in opening the APAS hatch, as well as then Ali Al-Karni, just at 10 a.m. Central Time, 5 minutes ago, opening the Dragon hatch. Again, this is live coverage of the arrival of the Ax-2 crew to the International Space Station. We are just standing by for those crew members to make their way out of Dragon and into the space station moments from now. UAE astronaut Sultan Al-Nayati just floating out of screen on the right-hand side there. He has been working alongside Woody Hoberg this morning to prepare the hatches for the crew to float through, as well as monitoring their arrival. Both Hoberg and Al-Nayati arrived as part of the Crew 6 crew and are now both members of Expedition 69, living and working aboard the International Space Station. Teams are also preparing the intermodule ventilation. That was the tube that we saw earlier that Woody Hoberg was working with. They will route that from the station side into the Dragon side to help equalize the atmospheres between both Dragon and station. Currently, the International Space Station is flying 264 statute miles southwest of Fiji. They are in an orbital nighttime, and here we have a great view of 4 of our crew members on the International Space Station. On the far left, that's NASA astronaut Steve Bowen. Down in the bottom left, NASA astronaut Frank Rubio.
Houston on 2, LIO cartridge is sealed per the decal at 15:08.
SpaceX copies.
NASA's Woody Hoberg was on the right of your screen, and in the center, Sultan Al-Nayati. Again, preparations to egress Dragon continue. You can hear Commander Peggy Whitson discussing with teams on the ground that they are still stepping through those final checks.
SpaceX Dragon for procedure. Do you want us to continue on step 7?
Yeah, it's affirmative on section step 7.
Again, hatches between both Dragon and the International Space Station are open. Teams in Dragon, or the astronauts in Dragon, just continuing their final checkouts before moving into the space station side, where they will conduct their welcome ceremony.
Dragon on 2, all the valves are closed, including the PPRV ISO.
And SpaceX copies. Thanks.
Again, this is a view from inside Node 2, also known as Harmony. The Ax-2 crew today docked to the Zenith, or space-facing port. There is another Dragon spacecraft docked to the forward-facing port.
Houston and SpaceX Dragon configuration is complete at step 8.9 of 2102.
Houston copies.
And SpaceX copies.
This crew, part of the 7 that are on the International Space Station, patiently waiting. There are 4 new crew members to arrive for the next 8 days. Not pictured in this frame, there are also 3 Roscosmos cosmonauts on board, including Sergei Prokopyev, Dmitry Petelin, and Andrei Fedyaev. So with the addition of these 4 crew members about to float on the space station, we will have an 11 total astronauts on station. And we have our first views of the Axiom crew members floating aboard. First is Commander Peggy Whitson rejoining the International Space Station. Next up is pilot John Schaffner making his first visit. Also on his first trip to space, you can see Ali Al-Karni representing the Saudi Space Commission. All smiles as he floats through the Dragon hatch. And rounding out the Axiom-2 crew, that's Rayana Barnawi, also of the Saudi Space Commission. The crew of the space station is now 11 crew members. Big smiles from Rayana Barnawi. She is now the first female Saudi to go to space. With Commander Peggy Whitson at the helm, these astronauts are in good hands. Peggy has 665 days already lived in space. She's just adding to that total on this mission. John Schaffner, his first trip to space. Getting some help out from Woody Hoberg, NASA astronaut, who is also on his first trip to space. He's been on the space station now for 81 days. Again, the total number of astronauts and cosmonauts on board the International Space Station now at 11. Three of the astronauts on the space station represent NASA, 3 represent Roscosmos, 2 represent the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, 1 represents the United Arab Emirates. Again, we are standing by for the start of the welcome ceremony. The crew will take some time to do some scene and voice checks and make sure that their microphones are set up properly, as well as that we have them all in frame before going into their welcome remarks. And of course, afterward, we will wrap our coverage before they step into their work and life aboard the International Space Station for the next 8 days.
Station Houston on 2 for Frank and PAO.
Well, with you on 2.
Hey, Frank, just wanted to tag up with you on the PAO event. We're thinking about doing a scene and voice in about 7 minutes from now. Will that work for you?
That'll be perfect. We will call you back in about, and we can even do 5 minutes if you guys want, but we'll call you back in 7 minutes.
Copy that. We prefer closer to 7 minutes as we have a handover in about 5 minutes from now.
That's great.
As you heard the Capcom relay to NASA astronaut Frank Rubio, we are expecting a handover. We're expecting that short handover in just a few minutes. We want to make sure that we have great audio and video from our visiting astronauts. So we are holding for that short handover, and then we will start the welcome ceremony. Again, crew arrived this morning at 8:12 a.m. Central Time, the Dragon hatch opening at 10 a.m. Central Time, and then crew members floating aboard just moments ago. Ali Al-Karni, it looks like he already has the hang of things on his first flight to space. The Axiom crew has trained for months in preparation for this mission. The Axiom crew has been training for months in preparation for this mission here at Johnson Space Center as well as at SpaceX, working with teams on the research that they will be conducting as well as learning space station systems. Three countries represented here. We've got Tan Al Nayati of UAE, two Roscosmos cosmonauts, as well as our two new astronauts representing the Saudi Space Commission on their 8-day stay on the International Space Station. Just above Barnawi and Al-Karni's heads, you can see the two EMUs, extravehicular mobility units, used by USOS astronauts on spacewalks. Those have been moved from the airlock to allow a little more space for the Axiom crew during this flight. Of course, we do have 11 crew members on board now, so we have to make some room for sleep spaces. And again, we are standing by anticipating a satellite handover here momentarily. Once we've regained communications, we'll go through some voice checks with the astronauts. And there it is, as expected, that handover from our satellites. We'll do those scene and voice checks when we come back to make sure that we have a picture-perfect view of the crew members before they give us some welcome remarks. This view from International Space Station Flight Control Room here in Houston, Texas. Teams continue to monitor the arrival of our 4 new visitors, as well as all of the systems aboard the International Space Station and the astronauts and cosmonauts that live there.